I want to open it up to the audience for any questions. There were quite a few asked during the course of the talk. One person did mention the problem of doctor wait times, and I'm wondering whether DocBot can offer a solution to, if not like clinical wait times, then kind of I guess the concept of wait time, like basically there being a barrier between patients and patients being able to receive care in a timely fashion.
Sure. And, if you really look at it, for all of the patients that would typically, visit a doctor for a follow-up, those could very easily be replaced by something like this, right? So while the first consult could be a face-to-face, or it could be, video consult, any and all follow-up could just be this asynchronous form of communication, where either the doctor is reaching out to the patient and saying, how are you doing? What do your vitals look like? How are you holding up? Or the patient reaching out proactively saying, I'm not doing too well. My fever is still not gone, or my blood pressure is still giving me trouble, or whatever. So I think that has a direct kind of impact on wait times. You can basically just replace all follow-up visits, or at least some, by leveraging something like this.
Yeah. We had another interesting question, and actually I experienced this recently as well, that a lot of times diagnoses are only possible if a doctor can have a detailed image of an ailment, or can like touch the patient. So how does DocBot bridge some of those gaps for telemedicine?
Sure. So two things, right? One, like I said, the first consult typically can still be a face-to-face, or it could be a video consult. So that would, give you some level of, proximity, albeit virtual, to the patient. Now, obviously you can't, touch and feel, but my second point is, that can be mitigated to some extent by a lot of, kind of telemonitoring solutions. And those would be obviously a combination of hardware and software, where, there are devices now that would remotely transmit, vitals, your SpO2 level, your blood pressure, your temperature, and things like that. So to a certain extent, obviously, you can mitigate that, but you can't eliminate it. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for answering that. We'll do. We're a little over time, but there's one more question here which I think is interesting and could spin into a longer conversation, which is basically you talked a lot on billing models in the beginning, and the question is sort of generally like how would a billing model work with something like DocBot, where the doctor is potentially splitting their time between multiple patients?
Right. So that's an easy one, right? These CPT codes that I talked about in the beginning, they kind of are tied to the the number of minutes that you spend in the consult from the time the patient establishes a connection with you. Now, since even though this is asynchronous communication, you still know, how much time you spent on it, replying and things like that. Now, obviously, there will be cases where you may do a little bit of something offline to help that patient, right? So what you could do is enhance the chat interface, just when you're submitting a claim, to add a little bit of more context in addition to basically just a chat transcript. That is something that is in the works, and it's quite a requested feature actually, especially now.
Cool. All right. Well, there's a couple more questions, but I'm afraid we are effectively out of time. So
I can actually quickly take those.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah, it can very easily work with Alexa, just because it's built, in and around the AWS ecosystem. So it's a relatively easy skill to build.
Okay.
and that can be done. And we do have 2 real-world deployments that we're working on right now, and one happens to be for one of the largest, or it's a large pharma company, multinational. I can't reveal who it is, but we're using that in a sort of patient care application, especially to take care of oncology patients.
Cool. And I think there was one question about how do you adapt the solution, which I think is a question about maybe extending it. I don't know if you can answer that. Maybe you can. There's a quick answer there.
Yeah. Again, so if the question is about adapt, so I guess there could be 2 ways to adapt it. One is sort of how do you integrate it with other EHRs and other systems like CRMs, etc. So DocPod basically makes all of these lookups through standard REST API calls. So it's relatively easy to integrate with other solutions. And if the adapt question is about other use cases, like I said, things like diagnoses and sending across lab results, or diet recommendations. You could very easily build around those use cases as well.
Yeah, and one of the questions here is specifically about lab test integrations. Is that something? Would that be a valid extension of something like DocPod?
Yes, it would be. Especially if you're using this, for example, you might want to create a group chat between, say, the doctor, the patient, as well as the lab, right? So the lab sends a lab report. The system contextualizes the lab report, pulls up reference values, correlates that with diagnoses, or other parameters such as prescriptions, etc., and then throws an intervention or gives you potential diagnoses and so on. So you could do things like that.
Really cool. Well, all right. Thank you everyone for the great questions, and thank you Kabir for the great answers. Got a lot of people thanking us for a really informative, in-depth session, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think we covered a lot of territory, and I think this is pretty great. Thank you to our guests and to our attendees. And oh yeah, the last thing is that we will of course send out the recording of this webinar once that's available. It takes Zoom a little while to process, and then we'll get it right over to you, and it will be available on the PubNub site as well.